A legend and leader in the hotel world, Horst Schulze's teachings and vision have reshaped the concepts of service and hospitality across industries. After an apprenticeship which began as a 14-year-old in a German resort town, Horst would go on to work for Hilton Hotels and Hyatt Hotels Corporation before becoming one of the founding members of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company in 1983. As president and chief operating officer of the Ritz-Carlton, Horst created operating and service standards that have become world famous throughout the hospitality industry and beyond. It was also under his leadership that the Ritz-Carlton became the first service-based company to be awarded the prestigious Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, and it won the award twice. Horst has also received numerous personal accolades, honorary degrees, and awards, including being recognized as Corporate Hotelier of the World in 1991 by Hotels Magazine. After leaving the Ritz-Carlton, Horst went on to found the Capella Hotel Group. Today, he serves as expert in residence at Arch and Tower, a boutique organizational strategy consulting firm. He also added author to his list of impressive accomplishments with his book, Excellence Wins, a no-nonsense guide to becoming the best in a world of compromise. In 2022, Auburn University named its School of Hospitality the Horst Schulze School of Hospitality Management. It's truly an honor to have such an esteemed guest on the show today. Welcome, Horst, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Well, thank you, Brian. You should come with me and introduce me all the time. Sounds really cool. I'm impressed.
Well, you are impressive, and I appreciate having you on the show today, and let's dive right in. Yeah. Let's talk about the concept of excellence. Your book is titled Excellence Wins, of course, and it's a fantastic book. It's available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. And you've made excellence the standard, not only in every business that you've been involved with, but also in your life. And by the way, you and I share that, which is one of the reasons I'm honored and delighted to have you on our show. How do you define excellence?
Well, interesting enough, by the way, I want to make clear here, because I'm always introduced as the hotel guy. I haven't worked with hotels for quite a few years, but I work with all kind of other companies, and the meaning is the same in any business or in your personal life. Excellence, very simply, most of all, we must understand it's not an accident. It's always the result of high intent and hard work. So what's your high intent in your life? What's your high intent in what you're doing today? Or are you just doing? And that's the problem. We just fulfill functions and go on and without a high intent where that function should lead us. I work with a number of companies, now many, and my consulting and on my boards and so on. And there is hardly anybody who actually have a vision, a high intent for the company. They have missions, which are quite good, but vision, a high intent. Even I work with, in fact, with a Christian university, very fine institution, very fine campus, absolutely exceptional, beautiful. And I work with the leadership to establish a vision. And after hours, we could not come up with something. And finally I said, how about being known as the finest Christian university in America? And the result was that would be too arrogant. In other words, they want to keep on working with an intent of mediocrity. What is this? That cannot produce excellence. I absolutely and fully believe that any company, people think I'm crazy when I say that. Any company, I don't care who it is and what it is, you can become the leader in your field if that's what you set your sight on, if that is your high intent, and you don't give it up. You keep on going toward it. You will fall down. You don't know what to do, but you will see it. After every step forward, you will see what to do next, and you will be. But now you can translate it into your personal life, your family life, to your church, to your institution. It doesn't matter. High intent. But it's not only the overall high intent, it's the high intent and the consequence of everything that you do. Excellence is not an accident. And let's face it, it takes the decision of excellence. Excellence. As your destiny, consequently, it's not accident, it's the decisions that you make in life.
I love that idea of intent, and I call it intentionality. And you're right. You do have to be intentional, first about making the decision that that's going to be the standard. And then secondly, taking all the action needed to achieve that desired result. Horst, you've devoted most of your life to unlocking the power of excellence, not only in yourself, but in countless others, individuals as well as organizations that you've worked with throughout your career. Why do you believe it's so important for us to orient our businesses and our lives around such a lofty standard?
Well, most of all, it is in life, particularly when you become a manager and so on, what is the greatest honor of being a manager? And leader more important than manager, but both are important. The greatest honor is that you have the opportunity to positively impact the life of others. Again, if you're conscious of that, and you do it with a high intent, you actually will accomplish that, and you help people to be successful and consequently personally be fulfilled. And even it's not a matter, but you see, I tell to my managers that I used to work with, it's not being a nice guy, because the nice guy only is nice to the people around them in order so that they think highly of them. No, the intent is to make people around you successful and consequently your organization successful. And if you're driven by those things and you remind yourself, you have to remind yourself that I'm not doing that naturally every day. I'm doing it by reminding myself of those things every day. You have to remind yourself, like the high intent, you're doing what in the next 5 minutes? You're going into a meeting? What's your high intent in that meeting? You're meeting somebody? What's your high intent? Is that high intent of value to everybody or only to you? That's not to you. High intent means high. And that's I think that's, when I look around, and that's the breakdown of companies. There is the only intent there is make a profit, which is driven by our society, by Wall Street, and so on, so on, so on, and by the evaluation. How is a manager evaluated? By the profit they make. I mean, come on. There is no high intent, no high thinking. So with other words, you have to manage yourself to step into a higher human frame and think, what's my higher thinking here? Am I really doing things for all concerned, or am I doing things for myself only?
I love that. And I definitely want to unpack this concept of excellence more, especially as it relates to organizations, but also personally. But let's back up a little.
Yeah.
And I know that you're no longer the hotel guy, that you're consulting and vocationally you've expanded into lots of other organizations. And you've actually done that for years. And whether you've been intentional about that or people have just looked at organizations that you've led and learned and applied those things to other industries, you've had a tremendous impact on the world with your leadership and some of the concepts that you've been teaching. But I know your desire to work in the hotel industry originated at a very early age, and I find that story fascinating. Where did that desire come from, especially at the age of 14 and maybe even a little before then? And tell us about the start of your career in the hospitality industry.
Well, Brian, I actually wish I knew, but for some reason, I was 11 years old, I went to my parents and said I would like to work in a hotel business, which was unthinkable at the time. There was no hotel. I've never been in a hotel. I've never been in a restaurant. Mind you, this was after war years. You haven't been in a hotel before. I must have read something. My parents, my mother thinks that I read something, came to them. And when, of course, at that time, they said, yeah. But I was possessed. I keep on talking about it. And maybe because of their negative response to it. Maybe that's why I kept on insisting on. My grandfather said, don't tell anybody, it's embarrassing. That's not what he did in a small town in Germany at the time. But my parents inquired and found if I want a career, I must start in the finest hotel possible. Sure enough, they found a job 100 kilometers away. At the time, that was far. And as a busboy, so I actually left home with 14. My mother took me to this new job. I lived in a dorm room in the hotel. I met a general manager who told us, you are learning to serve and be a servant to fine ladies and gentlemen who are our guests. You are, and literally said, you have to remember that you're nothing. Don't become envious, and learn how to take good care of fine ladies and gentlemen, which was quite an experience. In fact, my parents told me, now behave yourself, because guests there are very fine ladies and gentlemen. Behave yourself accordingly. And so we could never go to a hotel like that. This is only for fine people, and blah, blah, blah. And next, I meet the maitre d' of the hotel, who changed my life from the first second that I met him. He's the man that I reported to in a restaurant. He looked at me and said, now, tomorrow I want you to show up to work. No, I want you to show up at 7 a.m. If I meant 1 minute after 7, I would tell you so. He established in one sentence, we have rules, we have discipline, we have understanding, we are not floundering around, we have, when we say something, we mean it. And the next sentence he said, and don't come to work. Come here to be excellent in what you're doing. Now, mind you, this all went over my head at the time. I was 14 years old. I didn't know what he was saying there. But over the next 3 years working with this incredible human being, I learned what excellence is in his standard of excellence. He didn't do anything without a higher intent. He didn't serve food. He was there to make people feel well. He did, and everything was just the highest you can be in thinking in his profession, which he loved, that profession of caring for people. So you learn it, you start to understand it. And by the way, in the typical German, once a week you go to hotel school, school of your business, hotel school. And after about 2 years, the teacher asked us to write an essay, what we now think about our business. Going to work that evening, I saw that maitre d' approach a table. Now, mind you, the message of they are important, ladies and gentlemen, we are servants, was constantly hanging over us by the management of the hotel. But I saw the maitre d' approach a table, and the guest being actually proud that he came to them. I could clearly identify that. I had before, but it never hit me clear. And I said, wow. And when I went to my room that evening after dinner service to start working on my essay, 3 pages, the teacher said, what we now think about the business. I thought about the maitre d', and I wrote my essay around him. And I named the essay, We Are Ladies and Gentlemen. I learned that we are ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen. Because why was he respected? I realized for the first time, he was respected because he had defined himself as somebody very special. And everybody in the room respected him because he had defined himself as respectable. And for the first time, I realized I define myself. It's not my neighbors. It's not society, which everybody seems to think now defines you. That's why we copy everything. It's you who defines himself. And he taught that very clearly, you know. So it was an incredible impact on my life. If you don't mind, I hook something onto it. I left then after 3 years. He asked me to look him in the eye and promised that I would never go to work, always go only for excellence. I promised him. I took off as a 18, 19, 20, 21, and so on, came to the United States, have worked in the finest hotels in Europe, in Paris and London and so on, worked in San Francisco as a room service waiter in the Hilton with the intent of getting a promotion, because I was there only a month when one of the supervisors got promoted, and then one of the waiters was promoted to supervisor. I said, wow, this is for me. I'm the best waiter here, by far. I know. I worked in the finest hotels in the world. I know everything around food and beverage. And the manager was German too. So I knew the next promotion would be mine. In my mind, I built my whole life around that next promotion. Get promoted, stay 8 more months or so, go back to Europe, follow a career. And then, sure enough, a few months later, a promotion, supervisor got promoted again. The manager said, tomorrow morning we have a meeting, we're talking about Bill's promotion. And everybody came early, and I was early for once because I knew that would be the announcement of my promotion as supervisor. I knew that. It was very clear. There was no question about it. And my life was connected to it. And I came to work, and the manager said, all right, as you all know, Bill got promoted, and he deserves it, and let's applaud him, and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, the next supervisor is Fred. And I knew I wasn't Fred. I knew it. And it was a major, disastrous breakdown. And what did I think? It shows how stupid management is, et cetera, the typical thoughts of a young guy. It took me a few months to admit the other guy deserved it more. I came to work 5 minutes late in the morning, tired from being out in the night before, saying not even good morning. The other guy came 5 minutes early and said friendly good morning. When the manager asked, come on, let's do some side work here, like folding napkins or whatever, I said, why me? The other guy said, I'm happy to, et cetera, et cetera. And when I realized that, I went back to my furnished room in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco, lousy furnished room. I talked to the maitre d' there. He wasn't there. He didn't show up. He had passed away. He didn't show up, but I talked to him and apologized. I went to work. I didn't go for excellence. In my youth, I had been following the temptations of the world rather than making a decision for excellence. And I made up my mind that will never happen again. And I managed myself so it wouldn't happen again. And it didn't, really didn't. And my career took off like a rocket ship.
Well, that's a great story, and there's so much packed into it. I just want to make a couple comments.
Yeah.
First, what a blessing it was to have somebody pour into your life at such an early age when you first started in that restaurant, and to teach you about excellence and to teach you about service. And then, of course, it's even more remarkable that you took that lesson and all the things that you've done with it since. And we'll talk more about that. The other thing I wanted to touch on, because I didn't know the origin of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen until I read your book. But of course, that was a phrase that I was very familiar with. I've studied the Ritz Carlton because to me, the Ritz Carlton, like other iconic brands, Rolls-Royce is one that comes to mind, Louis Vuitton, those are all iconic brands and companies that exemplify excellence. And so I was very familiar with the phrase. I had no idea that it was something that you wrote down at the age of 17. And of course, at 17, it was Damen und Herren im Dienst zu Damen und Herren.
Genau. Exactly.
Ladies. So I get to practice my German a little bit today.
Yeah, wir sind Damen und Herren im Dienst zu Damen und Herren.
And it's for anyone in the hospitality industry, that's a phrase that probably stands out more than any other in that industry. And again, there are lots of companies who have benefited from training at the Ritz-Carlton company, or have read books about Ritz-Carlton, or have read your book and have benefited from that too. Horst, most of our listeners and viewers have experienced a high level of service, so they know what that looks like. But I'm sure you'll agree it's rare for a culture of excellence to be sustained over time.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it's more difficult today than ever before to do that, with higher employee turnover than ever before. We have 5 generations in the workforce for the first time in history, which creates multiple sets of dynamics around trying to strive for excellence. And maybe foremost, a society that for whom the standard is mediocrity rather than a standard of excellence. What has to be done to create such a culture of excellence, and then to reinforce and sustain it over time? Because I think there are a lot of people who have created excellence in their lives individually or in organizations. There are lots of organizations that that make an effort to do that and maybe get started in that. But that sustainability piece, the ability to reinforce it over time, especially with high turnover or with employees or team members who maybe aren't as committed to that as management or ownership is committed to that. Say more about that.
Well, it's in all companies the same. It's funny listening to that. And you said the difficulties of the day, shortage of help, labor, etc., etc. As a leader, I have to be aware of that, but I cannot make it an excuse. I can only be aware of it, so I take care of the situation and correct that situation and make that situation workable. And that is my role as a leader, not just explain what is wrong, but when I hear everybody, I hear it all the time. We have turnover. It's because the millennials, shortage of help. It's because, wait a minute, you are the leader here. I looked outside in the street, a lot of people. The problem is they don't want to work for you. You are in charge. If I dismiss it as a problem, societal problem that I cannot do anything about, it's over. It's over. I can't take care of it anymore. You're not here as a leader to make excuses. You're here to find solutions, first of all. And besides that, that too is not very difficult. I would like to remind you that in Ritz-Carlton, Capella, which I created afterwards, incidentally, is a superior company relative to market segment. Okay, ultra luxury is not luxury; it's ultra luxury, and the results there are better than in Ritz-Carlton was. Okay, so and it is rated #1 in the world now. I sold the company 3 years ago. I formed it after I left Ritz-Carlton, and it's the same issues. And then I look at many other companies. The issues are all the same. There is no other issue. It's leadership. It's management. But unfortunately, there's little leadership and a lot of management. What is it with Ritz-Carlton? At the time, the employee turnover in hotel restaurant business was 122% a year. 122%. How can you, when the knowledge that you teach books right out of the door again, how can you possibly become excellent? Ours, by about the time, the years before I left, was about 20%, 18%, 20%. We didn't pay more. We just offered people to join us and not work for us. That's the point. What do we do? What do we do as companies? Brian, every company, we hire people to fulfill a certain function. Well, the chair on which we're sitting is fulfilling a function, but we are dealing with human beings that have a right of belonging and purpose. So the first thing you have to develop, what are you offering them in your selection process, you offer them a function or a place to belong and purpose. So it is the processes of selecting and the communication. It is done. Next is your orientation as to how you online, if you will, the new employee. I know what happens in every company. I haven't found one different. I'm sorry. I'm sure there are. But I have worked with a lot. What is it? The first day they come to work and the manager makes his pathetic team speech. We are a team, blah, blah, blah. Well, he doesn't give an objective, because without an objective, you're not a team. A team has a common objective and helps each other to with that objective. But that's not a discussion, just the word team. The word team. And then he gives them the rules and regulation the first day of the employee. Here's the rules and regulation of the hotel, of the company. You don't belong. You're just a part, and you better fulfill rules and the regulation. And here your insurance paper, fill out those papers, and here's your turn, and here you sign your life away there and there. That's the first day. How about when they come in the first day, tell them who you really are and invite them again to be part of who you are. How about saying, here's our guest, and here's what they expect from our behavior, from us. How about telling, here's our vision. In the case of Ritz, Carlton or Capella, we want to be known as the finest in the world. Join me in this vision. And here is the motive of that vision. Objective and motive. Objective, best in the world. Motive, so we can grow together. So you can have opportunities. So we will be respected to each other. You will be, so we'll be honored. You will be honored. So we have more guests. So we have more income. You have more income. Connect them to your motives or your objective. Offer them purpose. You see, I cannot help, I always get back to that. Aristotle already, 3,000 years ago, he said you cannot be fulfilled in life unless you have objective and motive. Wait a minute. If we are leaders, we would help them fulfillment in their life. But we're not leaders. We manage processes and rules, etc., and not lead. And when I have worked with so many organizations, they don't have a vision, similar mission statements. Nearly all of them. No vision. We are, yeah, of course that's what you are, but what do you want to be? So with other words, there's a function statement and not a purpose statement. Yet we know people are fulfilled by purpose. So this has to all come together. This excuse, I know I'm going to be very bold, and people think I'm very arrogant here or something, but I would make any bet, I'm in Atlanta. So it happens I'm in Atlanta. So everybody in Atlanta can get upset with me. Everybody here is crying. Every hotel is crying for shortage of help. I'm making any bet if I would open a hotel tomorrow, there would be a line of employees staying around the corner wanting to work for us. Yes. It's leadership. It's not easy. Everybody, now that's a solution. Shortage of help. We are short of help. That's why we have a service problem, parking problem. Is that a solution? That's just an issue. What are you here for? To find the solutions.
You've said so much in there. I think one of the important things that I wanted to point out was what you said right in the beginning, that we oftentimes use all of those external dynamics, the turnover or how people are as excuses, and really what they are is just their dynamics, and we have a choice to either have that hold us back and to not move forward using those things as excuses for not doing so. And probably if you were sharing that with people, they'd say, oh yeah, you're right, it is tough and it's hard to find people and this and that and the other thing. But there are other companies that they face the same set of circumstances, the same set of dynamics, and yet they're moving forward and succeeding in spite of those. So
Brian, I want to make clear, I didn't say it is not tough. But here I'm saying you as leader are there to find those solutions for that, for the situation. And there are solutions. I mean, somebody found a solution to go to the moon, and you don't find a solution to find employees. Come on.
That's great. Horst, I want to dig into your book, Excellence Wins. It's a textbook for high-level service, for excellence both personally and professionally, and for creating great results. And as I was reading the book, and by the way, I read it twice. So I was first exposed to you when you spoke at the Global Leadership Summit in Chicago. Read your book then, and of course read it again in preparation for our time together today. And as I was going through it both times, I jotted down some notes about qualities that stood out as I was reading the book. May I ask you about a couple of them?
Sure.
Couple specific things? And these are great, by the way. The first is attention to detail. Horst, most people and most organizations are not especially detail-oriented, as you know. Why is attention to detail so important? And what are some ways that we can incorporate that into our organizations and even into the way that we operate personally?
Well, the details that are important, the most important, there are many, is how do I serve my market? And the details that are important comes from the market, the customer, not you. So, and if you don't serve the little details, now let me use the hotel. I don't want to make you a hotelier, but you can translate that into any business you're in. The hotel guest checks in. I know, of course, they want a nice, clean room. So that's simple. I want to check them in. I know they don't want to wait, so I have to have processes so they don't have to wait long. I have to have processes, make sure the room is clean, etc., etc., etc. And then we listen very careful after that what that guest said. What that guest said, hypothetically, there's a small detail here. If I really listen to the guest, not to my grandmother or to my mother-in-law and myself, but no, the guest, the customer. If the guest then says in a survey, yeah, but you had a beautiful robes in the room, and they were all high quality, everything, but when I took a shower, I took the robe off, and there was no hook to hang it on. Detail. Now I have to make sure, once I see that, it is now, I don't have to study that anymore. That makes a lot of sense. I have to add that detail now into the planning and building and readjusting every room, that there is a hook near the shower. Now, this is just one small detail which is driven by the customer. And of course, there are many details that are labor-driven, meaning employee-driven. That you say that in your survey says we don't have that. Why not correct it? So it's detailed not only to the market, but it's detailed internally, and then the functional detail. So, how do you make sure you build a company? How do you make sure you take care of the detail? Well, you have to mobilize the whole organization to identify the mistakes that happen, because that's where the details are, and eliminate one mistake at a time. One mistake at a time. In my book, I tell the mistake about the guest complaint, slow room service, for example. But here's the problem. Management wants to correct it by themselves. They sit in an office and all of a sudden they become expert of everything there is and say, here's what we're going to do. Rather than going to the employees that are connected to the process. In my case, I was talking slow room service and said, here's a detailed concern. The guest thinks that we're often late. You tell me the answer. You connected to the process. Tell me the answer, how we can eliminate this concern, this one detail. So I involved the room service order taker, the waiter, the busboy, the cook, to find out how we can do it faster, rather than me in the office. So the small details have to go to where that detail is taking place. and connect the people to that detail to find the answer. That's the thing. Again, that's not management. That's leadership to do that, to lead people to it. And you know always why you want it, because you want to be, in our case, the best in the world. So I as a leader, and that's an important point that I want to make here, after we decided that's what we want to do with this new company, to be the best in the world, then I have to question myself as a leader, not as a manager, is it good for everybody? Is it good for the investor? Is this vision, this high intent good for the investor? Is it good for the customer? Is it good for the employee? Is it good for society as a whole? I, as an individual, look, I'm not selling that, but I, as an individual, have to always, with who I am, have to go back, would God approve? And if everything says yes, now I can, this is a leadership objective and everything. But I clearly said the employees are involved here. They're involved in every detail. And that's how you get to what your small details, it comes from the customer or the employee. And the employee have to be involved. Those that are connected to the detail have to be involved to correct where it is not going 100%.
That comes back to intentionality, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You need to be very intentional about creating an awareness, first of all, and then doing something about that attention to detail.
Yeah, so, but see, employees who were selected and understand they're part of something, they help to identify the issue. The employee who was just hired for their functions will not step out of their function and not find it and not connect it.
Yeah. Horst, you mentioned complaints, and that was another note that I made. I think people, companies, and organizations really struggle with how to handle complaints. We all know that challenges are going to arise, that complaints are going to occur, but oftentimes it seems like how we respond to those complaints does more damage than the actual issue. How do most people respond to complaints or handle complaints, react to complaints, and how should we approach it instead?
Well, in fact, by the way, you mentioned the values of the book. I hope to accomplish thinking of leadership there in the book. That was my main intent. But anyway, and connected to that, well, you have to lead your people, and you have to know leadership implies that you know things not from yourself, that you're very conscious what the customer wants, and lead the organization to a place which is of great value. And that, of course, I can only become the best in the world if our customer says so, period. So I have to understand that. I have to now pull in my employees and connect them to that desire. And that's an ongoing communication and so on. But I have to know, no matter what I do, some customers will be unhappy. And now, I cannot afford that, because a customer that's unhappy becomes a terrorist against your company. I know that. So consequently, we started that too. What does it mean? And it turns out that 96% of all complaints, and not in hotel business, generally, the complaining customer, all they want is get rid of their frustration. And they complain to the first person that listens. I said, wow, that means they may complain to the busboy about their stay about their room. So we went and taught and certified every employee around the world. Mind, you have to understand, we were in 5 continents, all right? Every employee around the world, we certified how to handle a concern or complaint by the customer. And it goes in a nutshell. Now, mind you, it takes a little longer to teach it, but in a nutshell is, number one, if somebody expresses concern or complaint, listen carefully. Number 2, empathize. Number 3, apologize. Number 4, make amends. And we had number 5, delight. Like in the book, I gave an example that where the guest comes for breakfast and the busboy said, "Good morning, sir. I hope you have a nice day with us." And the guest says, "I didn't because my TV didn't work." Well, what we taught our employees, no matter what the complaint, you own it. In that moment, the busboy owns the TV. He is now to say, "Please forgive me, sir. I'm so sorry." And that case, the employee now is empowered. There's another word that is used and not really managed. Our busboy now was empowered to buy the guest a breakfast and say, "I'm so sorry, I buy a breakfast because of my TV." But then he could go another step and finding out what room the guest is in and send the guest some cookies and apologize one more about the TV. In that moment, a potential terrorist against your company becomes an ambassador for your company. And that was, of course, the reason. That was the high intent. Even if a complaint comes, we make him an ambassador. And knowing that 96% just want to be heard, want to be heard and said, "I'm sorry," rather than saying, "I called the manager," which is, they get more angry.
Well, that's the first thing that I was going to say is your number one point, listen. So many companies and so many people don't even do that. Right.
Yes.
And most of the time, somebody just wants to express their frustration. Yeah. And if they'll have somebody who just listens, then oftentimes that's enough. And then the challenge is resolved. And
96%. We know that.
I find it interesting. And I was going to ask you about your terminology, a terrorist against the organization, or an ambassador for the organization. Those are very strong terms on both sides of the spectrum. But I think that really illustrates the importance of this issue and being able to resolve complaints. And by the way, I think that's true not just for an ultra luxury hotel company, but for any organization where part of our goal is to serve people.
That's true anywhere. That's true in a hardware store. That's true anywhere. It's very simple. I mean, so since I know, and why do I say terrorist? By the way, in our case, and you can that exists. That relative exists in any business. My guess, let's say. We had Capella. We had some hotels in New Zealand. The average rate per night was $3,000. That guest comes from a travel agent. If that guest is not having that, guaranteed that travel agent will ask that guest, "How was it?" And if that guest doesn't say it was great, the travel agents will take us from the shelf. They won't sell us anymore. As a terror. But if he say it was really great, he just sold me like an ambassador. That's where.
The stakes are that high, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
I give an example. So somebody said, "What of in a simple other business?" Well, let's take a hardware store. I mentioned the word hardware store. You go and buy a hammer, need a hammer, and you go and buy it. And you get a hammer the way you want it, the handle the way you want it, the way it feels, the way it grips, everything's fine. You have a good hammer. Do you think you will tell anybody in the world there's a hardware store that sells good hammers? It's ridiculous. Why would you want to go back there? Because it's a good hammer. But if the hospitality was excellent, they welcomed you nice, they helped you out, they were extremely friendly, they walked with you to the door and said, "Have a great day," and open the door, "Thank you for coming by," you will be convinced about that hardware store. We have to understand those things. And that means I have to make sure I couldn't hope that my doorman in Shanghai is nice. or in Africa, or in Osaka, or in Berlin, or in Philadelphia. I had to make sure the processes to select them right, to connect them right, to communicate right, and so on. It's all process after that. That is managing. Leadership is making sure they join you, making sure they work in an environment where they want to do things, not have to do things.
Yeah, it's a difficult culture to create, but once you do, you'll stand far above your competitors for sure. You mentioned the hardware store, and we all have hardware stories, and we walk into a hardware store for somebody who isn't handy like me. You probably are, and maybe you walk into a hardware store and know what you're looking for. But I think most people walk into a hardware store and they need a little screw, and they have no idea where to find it. And in some stores, there will be no one approaching them to help them. And yet, because you've experienced this, I'm sure, I know I have, that you walk into other hardware stores and you have a person come up, a gentleman or a woman come up and asks you what you're looking for, and then walks you over and all you need is one little screw. You don't need a box of 100 screws. You just need one, but you need one particular screw, and you have somebody who helps you to do that. And then they walk you up to the register to cash out, and then they wave as you're walking out the door and tell you to have a nice day. And when that happens, you're going to go to that hardware store every single time after that. And if it doesn't happen, you're going to look for a place that does that.
Exactly. I'm convinced that as a leadership, I have to create an environment where every interaction with one of my employees convinces the customer to come back. That's it.
Yeah.
Every interaction. We should seek those interactions.
That's well said. Horst, one last concept that I jotted down was around measurement. And by the way, these are, so you'll read a lot of business books that have great advice, great input, great stories, but these concepts that I've pulled out, I think really set your book apart from a lot of other books that I've read. And this last concept is measurement. And it's an important concept for me. I talk about it. I write about measurement. This idea of what gets measured gets done. And if you're not measuring something, then don't be surprised when you're not achieving the result that you're looking to achieve. But you maintain it's not enough to work hard, that performance measurements are essential to success. And you also point out in the book that just measuring things financially, profitability, for example, isn't enough either. Share with us more about the importance of measurement and how we can integrate that into our organization.
Let me emphasize, economics is not a real good measure. I can tell you that. I mean, if I run a hotel, mind you, I'm running a hotel in Jamaica. Our headquarters is in Washington, headquarter. I'm the general manager. How I'm going to be evaluated? Bottom line. That's it. But I can manipulate the bottom line. I can, instead of buying fresh flowers in the lobby, I put plastic flowers in there, or none. Instead of having piano in the lobby playing in the afternoon, I don't have that. In fact, I'm going to change the soap to a little smaller, and I'm making more profit, and I'm getting promoted from corporate office in Washington. I'm getting applauded from the corporate office in Washington for good management. That's what it is. So I have to measure and really know what's going on. I have to measure, of course, what I looked at every day. I looked at 5 things. Now they have many sub points which I didn't look on unless there was a problem in one of those 5 things. I looked at the economic of the day. Of course, I have to know that as the leader. But I looked at how many percent of the guests want to return and want to recommend us. And we had a ceiling, a red line. It could not be under 92% top box. If it was, I interceded. And then, of course, I looked at all the sub-measures, check-in, food, everything, cleanliness, everything, all the sub-measures where it would possibly happen. And the next measure I looked at is employee satisfaction. There too, every day I looked at that, even though we made 2 surveys a year, but it changed slightly by call-in. It was tweaked. So I look constantly, is there something happening anywhere? And every hotel, look at every hotel. I mean, it was set up when there was a red arrow down, then I looked at it because it went down. If it stays up, it was fine. I looked at the future business indicators, of course, individual, and a second one, group indicators. So I knew what business is going to be in the forward, if we're ahead of the game or not. If we're not ahead of the game, I interceded. If there was employee satisfaction went down, I interceded. If customers, I interceded. In fact, I threatened everybody. If one of the measurements is down and stays down for 3 months, I will move in the hotel. And the general manager has to sit beside me. I will use his office, his desk. He has to sit in the corner and see what I'm doing and correct it. That was the biggest threat I could give somebody. And I did it, period. I cannot compromise because I know I cannot compromise because I know if we accomplish our vision, it's good for all concerned. I cannot compromise because of one guy or one woman, period. I have no right, I have no moral right to say, well, he's a nice guy. No, he's a nice guy, hurting thousands of employees and thousands of customers and thousands of, and huge amount of investors. Come on, I can't do that.
This next question comes from my background in accounting and finance, and I'm really curious because you talked about managing to the bottom line and how managers and leaders are held accountable to the bottom line. Especially with an ultra luxury brand like Capella, how do you balance investing in guest experience versus cost cutting? You mentioned the making the shampoo bottles smaller, and I think you probably dance a fine line between the two. You can't spend an inordinate amount of money or an endless supply of money creating a luxury or ultra luxury guest experience, and so you do need to be sensitive to cost and investment and those sorts of things. How did you balance that at Ritz Carlton and later at Capella?
Yeah, well, let me give you a thought here. Take a city like Singapore. Great business city. I have a great Ritz-Carlton, absolutely great Ritz-Carlton. And last time I looked, a couple of years ago, the average rate a night for a room was $480. We have a Capella not far away. Our average rate a night was $1,200. So there is, however, the guest perceives high value. I have to give that. That high value perception only comes from giving back to the customer, calling them before and what can I do for you, etc. I cannot compromise that. I concentrate on what makes money and excellence, not on the money. I concentrate what makes the money, and that is excellence of service and product delivery. Now, you touched on that. How about the temptation of taking the flowers away and so on? They're always there. That's called cost cutting. That means I take something away that lowers my cost, but at the same time it takes something away from the market, from the customer. And there's such thing than efficiency. That means I look at my processes and try and take time and cost out of the process without affecting the outcome of the process, without affecting the service or the product to the customer. And that is, again, finding now the employees again have to be involved, finding the mistakes that we made and eliminate the mistake. And every time, nearly every time when you eliminate a mistake permanently by finding the root cause, you save money and you improve your product. Now, that's efficiency. Now, well, how does that work? Well, the experts say that a well-run organization makes about 58,000 mistakes per million transactions. Now, anybody who hears that said, not us, not us, well, you too. You too. So how about eliminating and become Six Sigma? That's where Six Sigma comes from. Eliminate those 58,000 mistakes. You will save maybe, now, I'm going to say it even though I know that nobody accepts what I'm saying now. You save maybe as much as you now make profit. But otherwise, you would double your profit without having taken away anything from your customer. In fact, improve the service to your customer. There is tremendous upsides in excellence, but it takes time, diligence, commitment to accomplish it. It is accomplished by having make the decisions and not change your mind. High intent, no compromise.
And that's much harder to do, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's easier to stop the fresh flowers every day from coming, or to reduce the size of the shampoo bottle or the pour of the wine in the bar.
Yeah,
the things that you're talking about are more challenging.
Yeah, I see. I have a friend here who is running a hotel that's a year old, and great hotel. And he has certain concepts that unquestionably will make the hotel totally successful, but it costs money right now because it's the first year. You have to mature the hotel 2-3 years, but the ownership of the hotel, he's a part of a management company like Ritz, Carlton management. We didn't own the hotel. Is pressuring now to change those concepts, which in the long run, in the short term, will give me immediately more money because there's some cost involved in it. In the long run, they're forfeiting millions and millions and millions, 100-fold the money that they save now. But that's what it is. You get the pressure for money. And that's what I said. The pressure for money comes from Wall Street, comes from owners, comes from investors, and everybody wants the results today and not for tomorrow. Even though in the beginning, I opened one hotel in Europe, which I argued that many things should not be done because they're too costly. And he said, don't you understand? We don't care about the money. We care about the image here. After 4 weeks, they called me for an emergency session because we didn't make enough money. Mm. That's it, That's not how it works. You have to clearly look at your intent and stand behind it. And for me, again, impossible not to make it if you just stick to it.
Yeah. Horst, we've been talking about organizational excellence. Sure. And I believe that I read part of measurement for you personally is constantly evaluating your own performance. So I'd like to just talk for a brief moment about personal excellence. Is that something that you continue even today? And
sure.
What does that look like?
Yeah, well, I have to do it. Otherwise, I would be slack at and everything because I have to manage myself. I know that moment in San Francisco, in that room, never left me. I knew in that moment, in about 5 years after leaving, 6 years after leaving that Maitre D', from promising I would go for excellence, I became just functioning person because I didn't manage myself. So I knew from there on I have to manage myself. That's and I still do. Otherwise, I immediately slip into something else. So the question and excellence, your personal excellence comes into play there. So what is personal excellence and how do you improve yourself constantly or at least make sure you stay on a certain level? You have to question yourself at least once a month. how relative to your functioning as a person. A person functions, relationship, values, and morality. Those are the person. So I have to question myself, my functioning. How could I improve what I do? You have to ask yourself once a month, say, what am I doing? How could I improve my work? And when I work with people on that, they're looking for a big hit, but there's no big hit. Tweak yourself with small things, with small little things. Tweak yourself. Because you will see something where you can do better. Next, the same thing in your relationship. In fact, there, I had big struggle. I ended up saying to myself, I have to at least 4 times a day stop and say, I have to work on my relationship. I still have to. And in that case, say, if I meet with a guest, how could I have done that better afterwards? If I meet with an employee, how could I have done that better? If I meet with a manager, how could I have done that better? If I walk by somebody, how could I have said better hello? And tweak your relationship. And you define yourself as more by relationship than function, by the way. Next, of course, I have to question myself, morally and ethically, how can I prove myself? I personally, again, people don't think that I'm trying to sell you something. I'm just rounding it up how I think. I personally question myself, spiritually, how could I do better? So if I work on those things, you can take this one out if you want to. I'm not selling you. If I work on things, now I'm improving as a human being, personally. So in other words, I can't just lead my people. I have to lead myself. And when I make a decision, I question myself very carefully, what's my high intent? Is it good for everybody? And they have to ask that constantly. Is it good for everybody? Because otherwise we do in something ridiculously for ourselves. And that won't work on the end.
Yeah, and by the way, all the concepts that we've been talking about that create organizational excellence also apply personally. So intentionality, attention to detail, measurement, it's all applicable.
Again, you said the measurement. I mean, as I said before, I mentioned 4 measurements, but we have had countless below there. But I couldn't look at all of them, so I'll just look at that. But if one of my measurements, I have to go back and say, where in my measurements do I see there is a hiccup?
Horst, you mentioned spirituality, and I know you're a man of faith, and you talk about this at the end of your book, Excellence Wins, and so I want to ask you about it. It's for most people, it's not as clear the role that God plays in someone's life. But it's remarkable to me looking at that declaration that you made to your parents about wanting to go into the hotel business, and then what you did with that over the next 70 years in terms of reshaping the concepts of excellence and service and raising the standard, not only in the hotel industry, but across the global business landscape. It really, as I think about that, and we share faith, it just seems like God planted a seed in your life very early on. And you didn't, like you said, you had never been in a hotel and never had been in a restaurant. And yet you declared at a very young age that that's what you wanted to do. And in fact, that's how you've invested your entire career, your entire adult life. Share with us, if you would, a little more. I don't know if you think about it in those terms, but how do you feel about that as you reflect on your career and on your life?
Yeah, well, I that's part of my faith issue is what you addressed here. If I would look at my career, leaving home when I was 14, and look at my career being, forgive me, a true leader in our industry and in other industries, if I would look at myself, that would be the ultimate arrogance. I happen to believe, and that's also a decision, let me comment on that was somehow faith, and I'm consequential why, what who I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do, and I look at my failures and so on. But in the end, believing or not believing is again nothing but a decision. So here is that decision again. Your destiny is your decisions. It's not, and here we talk faith. We talk so much about faith. We talk so much in this country about all kind of things, and which is mind-boggling to me when I sometimes hear what is being said. I have a good friend. I have a home in Germany still. So my wife, who is from Pittsburgh, loves it there too. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the home anymore. Let's face it. And so we go there, and I have a good friend. Stefan is a great guy, intelligent, fine business, elegant. I mean, he and I used to be running together. Now we walk together, my age. So he is a proud atheist. I happen to be a believer, And the other day, a year ago, we went for a walk, and all of a sudden, he likes to discuss this issue, and I don't. But he said, well, oh, come on, Horst, you with your God and belief and so on, you cannot prove that there is God. Now, think about that statement. And I said, oh, wait a second, you can't prove that there isn't. So with other words, it can be nothing but a decision that evolved, or you stop one day and says, I believe this or the other. Now, to me, personally, again, people think I don't necessarily like this, because people think I try to sell something. It's the last thing I want to do, because it's your decision. For me, it's an easy decision, because I rather make a decision for hope than against hope. Simple. So your destiny is your decisions. Folks, think about that for a while, if we still can think.
I appreciate you sharing that part of your life, Horst. Your book, Excellence Wins, is, as I mentioned earlier, available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. How can people find out more about you?
Oh, just look at the website, horstschulze.com, and go from there. I'm on LinkedIn and so on, so. But the book, again, is on Amazon. It was, guys, it's not a religious book. Even though at that point on the end, it would have been, I would not have been honest if I wouldn't have told my stories, my spiritual story, which was really actually connected to a cancer that I had 29 years ago. Yesterday is 29 years ago that I was operated on, which I was told was fatal. I would have a year left to live at the time, by every expert there is, and that is 29 years ago. So the year was a long year. It was 29 years. They told me 10 months, 20 years. So I told that story and told how in that moment I was sustained by my faith, and would have been difficult without it. But that's the story, so don't worry about it. It's not a book about making you change your thought. In the contrary, it's just telling, and the end I had to tell my story too in that book. I felt compelled to do that.
Well, and I'm glad you did, and I'm certainly glad that you made it through the cancer and that we're able to be here today. We'll definitely share the link to the book, the link to your website, and other social media in our show notes. And Horst, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for equipping us with tools to unlock the power of excellence, not only in ourselves, but also in our organizations and those around us. I really appreciate your time today.
It was a pleasure to be with you, Brian. I have quite a few podcasts, and sometimes the interviews are good and sometimes they're not. And this one was an excellent one, which left great flow. It's amazing how the interviewer brings it out of you or not. Great job as far as you are concerned. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Vielen Dank, mein Freund. My standard is excellence, and I've learned from you, and so I certainly appreciate that. And to our listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in to Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with Horst Schulze on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at brianbartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.